I never expected an email to change my life, but there it was in my inbox at 2 a.m., subject line. About the Finch family painting. My finger hovered over the delete button, probably just another scam, but something made me pause. The sender's name, Nolan Grady, wasn't familiar, but the contents of his message sent a chill down my spine. My name is Alara, and until that night, I'd been living a pretty predictable life. Running my cybersecurity YouTube channel, working IT contracts, and generally keeping to myself in my grandmother's old Victorian house. The painting he mentioned hung above my fireplace, a moody landscape that had been in my family for generations. Not particularly valuable, I'd always thought, but full of sentimental worth. I believe I can help you authenticate its true value, his email read. I've been researching the artist's lost works, and your family's painting matches the description of one that disappeared in 1942. I sat back in my chair, the blue light of my monitor illuminating my home office. The painting had always been just there, a constant backdrop to family photos, holiday gatherings, and quiet evenings alone. My grandmother never mentioned anything special about it, beyond saying it was precious to our family. My best friend Liana would tell me to ignore the email. She's always warning me about online creeps, especially since I started getting more YouTube followers. But something about the way this guy wrote, the specific details about the artist's technique, the historical context, it felt legitimate. I found myself typing a response. Interesting claim. What makes you think this is the painting you're looking for? His reply came surprisingly fast, the distinctive storm clouds in the upper left corner. The way the light hits the cottage windows. But most importantly, the small red bird hidden in the forest edge, a signature element in all of Friedrich Müller's work from that period. My heart skipped. I grabbed my phone's flashlight and walked to the painting, scanning the darkened tree line. There it was, a tiny cardinal I'd never noticed before, barely visible against the shadowy foliage. I'd love to discuss this in person, his next message read. Perhaps over coffee? I promise I'm not some art thief. Just a passionate historian who's been searching for this piece for years. I should have trusted my instincts. Should have listened to that nagging voice warning me something wasn't quite right. But curiosity won out, and I agreed to meet him at a busy cafe downtown the next day. That decision would set in motion a chain of events that would test everything I thought I knew about trust, family, and the true value of things we hold dear. The cafe meeting with Nolan turned into dinner, which turned into weekly dates, and before I knew it, 3 months had flown by. Everything seemed perfect until the day he insisted on introducing me to his mother. She's dying to meet you, he said, but something in his tone made me wonder if that was entirely true. Marjorie Grady's house looked like it had been lifted straight from a luxury real estate magazine. As we walked up the manicured pathway, Nolan squeezed my hand. Just be patient with her, he whispered. She can be intense. Intense was an understatement. Marjorie answered the door wearing what looked like a month's worth of my salary in designer clothes. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she looked me up and down. So this is the mysterious Alara, she said, ushering us inside. Nolan tells me you work in computers? Cybersecurity, I corrected, following her into an immaculate living room. I also run a YouTube channel about. Oh, social media, she interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. How? Modern. Tell me about your family home instead. Nolan mentioned it's quite historic. I shifted uncomfortably on the pristine white sofa. It was my grandmother's. Victorian era, isn't it? Marjorie leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails wrapped around a crystal wine glass. Those homes require such expensive maintenance. How do you manage it all on your own? Nolan cleared his throat. Mom, we're not here to discuss Alara's finances. I'm just showing interest, darling. Marjorie's smile tightened. After all, if things continue progressing between you two, these matters become relevant to the whole family. The whole family? We'd been dating for 3 months, and suddenly she was talking about the whole family? I caught Nolan's eye, but he was staring intently at his shoes. That painting you mentioned, Marjorie continued, the one Nolan's so fascinated by. Have you had it appraised recently? It's not for sale, I said firmly. No one's suggesting that, dear. She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Though in this market with the right buyer. Mom. Nolan's voice carried a warning edge I'd never heard before. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Through the window, I watched a gardener meticulously trimming Marjorie's rose bushes, probably earning more per hour than I did. More wine? Marjorie stood abruptly, not waiting for an answer. As she left the room, I'd heard her mutter something about old money versus new money. Nolan squeezed my knee reassuringly. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped into something much bigger and much more complicated than a simple family dinner. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Marjorie's eyes had lit up when she mentioned the painting's potential value. The first year of marriage passed like a whirlwind. Nolan moved into my grandmother's house, bringing his charm and, increasingly, his mother's constant presence. I tried to tell myself it was normal, that Marjorie was just being protective. But the way she circled that painting like a hawk watching its prey set my teeth on edge. I found the perfect spot for it, Marjorie announced one Sunday afternoon, gesturing at my family painting. The lighting in your dining room would really make those colors pop. It's fine where it is, I said, continuing to type on my laptop. Another YouTube script deadline loomed. Darling, she sighed, you can't keep treating it like some ordinary wall decoration. Do you know what collectors would pay for an authenticated Mueller? Before I could respond, Nolan appeared from the kitchen. Mom, remember what we discussed? Their eyes met in a way that made my fingers freeze over the keyboard. There was something in that look, a secret language I wasn't meant to understand. Later that night, I was heading to bed when I heard their voices drifting up from the study. I paused at the top of the stairs, my heart pounding. She's too attached to it, Marjorie was saying. If we just explain the investment potential. Not yet, Nolan cut in. Trust me, I know how to handle this. The Barrett Gallery already. The Barrett Gallery? I whispered to myself, my blood running cold. One of the most prestigious art dealers in the city. 6 figures, Nolan. Minimum. Think about what we could do with that kind of money. We need to be patient. Alara's not ready. I backed away from the stairs, nearly tripping over our cat. My hands were shaking as I texted Liana. Need to talk. Tomorrow. Important. That night, lying next to Nolan, I watched him sleep. His face looked different somehow, like a mask had slipped slightly out of place. I thought about all those conversations about the painting's history, his supposed passion for art authentication. Had any of it been real? The next morning, Marjorie showed up unannounced, again. This time with a professional photographer friend who just happened to be in the neighborhood. For insurance purposes, she explained brightly. You can never be too careful with valuable antiques. I watched them photograph my grandmother's painting from every angle, making notes about the frame condition and dimensions. Nolan stood by, nodding enthusiastically about documentation for posterity. That's when I knew I needed to protect more than just a painting. I needed to protect myself from the 2 people I should have been able to trust most. The question was, how far would they go to get what they wanted, and what would I have to do to stop them? Liana nearly spilled her coffee when I showed her the video feed on my phone. After that conversation I overheard, I'd installed a tiny camera in my study, a product I'd actually reviewed for my YouTube channel months ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. He did what? Liana's voice carried across the cafe, drawing looks from nearby tables. Quit his job yesterday, I said, keeping my voice low. Said he wanted to focus on our future. Then I caught this. The footage showed Nolan and Marjorie in my study at midnight, examining the painting with white gloves. They were speaking to someone on speakerphone about transport arrangements and private buyers. Have you talked to Ethan about this? Liana asked. Her lawyer husband's analytical mind would be useful right now. Not yet. I needed to process it first. I rubbed my temples. The thing is, Nolan's been moving money around. Large amounts. How do you know? I'm a cybersecurity specialist, remember? Let's just say his password isn't as secure as he thinks. I showed her my phone again, this time displaying banking records. 3 transfers to offshore accounts in the past week. The cafe door chimed, and I nearly jumped out of my skin when Marjorie walked in. She didn't notice us in the corner booth, too busy arguing with someone on her phone. The auction house needs an answer by Friday, she was saying. No, he doesn't understand. We need this to work. The debts are, she disappeared into the bathroom before we could hear more. Debts? Liana whispered. What debts? My hands were shaking as I pulled up another document on my phone. I found this buried in Nolan's email. Marjorie's house is in foreclosure. They're both drowning in debt, and apparently, they think my painting is their life raft. The bathroom door opened, and Marjorie emerged. This time, she saw us. Her perfectly made-up face froze for a moment before she plastered on a smile and walked over. Alara, darling. What a coincidence. I was just heading to your house to discuss the dinner party this weekend. What dinner party? I asked, watching her face carefully. The one Nolan's planning. Didn't he tell you? He's invited some art collectors. Friends of mine. Very exclusive circle. My stomach turned to ice. I forced a smile. Must have slipped his mind. After Marjorie left, Liana grabbed my hand. You need to get that painting out of the house. Today. I nodded, already formulating a plan. But as I stood to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Nolan. Great news about the painting. Don't make any plans for tonight. Everything's about to change. He had no idea how right he was. I raced home from the cafe, my mind spinning with possibilities. The painting needed to be moved, but where? As I pulled into the driveway, a sleek black SUV I didn't recognize was parked outside. Through the living room window, I could see Nolan gesturing animatedly to two men in expensive suits. My hands trembled as I pulled up the security camera feed on my phone. The audio crackled to life. The provenance is solid, Nolan was saying. My wife just doesn't understand its true value. Once we have the paperwork finalized. Tonight, one of the men interrupted. The Barrett Gallery's buyer won't wait. The wire transfer is ready. I felt sick. They were planning to sell it tonight, without my knowledge or consent. As I watched, one of the men reached for the painting. Don't touch that. Marjorie's voice cut through the feed. We agreed. Not until everything settled. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Got your message. Documents ready. Do you want to proceed? Before I could respond, Nolan stepped outside. His face lit up with that charming smile I'd once fallen for. Perfect timing. Come meet our guests. I forced myself to walk inside, my security camera still streaming to my phone in my pocket. The two men introduced themselves as art dealers, but their eyes were cold, calculating. Your husband tells us you're interested in selling, the taller one said. Does he? I kept my voice steady, watching Nolan's reaction. Interesting, since this is the first I'm hearing about it. Darling, Nolan stepped closer, laying his hand on my arm. Remember what we discussed about investments? This is the opportunity one was telling you about. We never discussed selling my grandmother's painting. Marjorie laughed nervously. Don't be difficult, dear. This is about securing your future, our future. I pulled away from Nolan's grip. I need some air. In the kitchen, I quickly texted Liana. Plan B. Now, everything okay in here? Nolan followed me, his charm slipping slightly. These men have traveled a long way. We shouldn't keep them waiting. I turned to face him, really looking at him for the first time in months. How much? What? How much debt are you and your mother in? His face darkened. You've been snooping. And you've been lying since the day you sent that first email. The sound of movement from the living room made us both turn. Through the doorway, I watched in horror as one of the men carefully lifted the painting from the wall. Don't worry, Nolan whispered, his voice hard. The money will more than make up for any sentimental value. I pulled out my phone, finger hovering over Ethan's number. One call would set everything in motion. But was I ready for what would happen next? The moment I pressed call, everything exploded into chaos. Ethan and two police officers burst through the front door, followed by Liana wielding her phone like a weapon, already recording. Step away from the painting, one officer commanded. The art dealers froze, the painting half-wrapped in their protective covering. This is ridiculous, Nolan sputtered, his charm evaporating. We're just conducting a legitimate sale. Without the owner's consent, Ethan cut in, his lawyer voice sharp and precise. And with falsified documentation, I might add. Marjorie's perfectly composed facade cracked. You don't understand. We had no choice. The debts, the collectors. So you decided to steal from me? My voice shook as I pulled up the security footage on my phone. I have everything. The late-night meetings, the calls to Barrett Gallery, the offshore accounts. You spied on me? Nolan's face contorted with rage. After everything I've done for you? I laughed, a hollow sound that surprised even me. Everything you've done for me? You mean like targeting me specifically because of my painting? Planning this con from the very first email? The color drained from his face. Marjorie stepped forward, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood floor. We can explain. Save it for your statements, the officer interrupted, pulling out handcuffs. But Nolan wasn't finished. He grabbed the painting from the dealer's hands and held it over the fireplace. You want to play hardball? Fine. Let's see how much your precious family heirloom is worth as ashes. Don't. I moved forward, but Liana caught my arm. You really want to add destruction of property to your charges? Ethan asked calmly, but I could see the tension in his jaw. Property? Nolan sneered. This painting is worth more than everything else in this house combined. And you know what? Maybe it deserves to burn. Just like everything else in this sham marriage. The painting tilted closer to the flames. In that moment, I saw everything clearly. The manipulation, the lies. The careful way he'd worked to isolate me from everyone except him and his mother. But I also saw something else, fear. Pure, desperate fear in both their eyes. Do it, I said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at me. What? Nolan faltered. Burn it. Prove that's all you ever cared about. I stepped closer, my voice steadier now. But first, let me tell you what you never bothered to learn about that painting. It's not just art. It's the last piece of my family's history. And you know what? I'd rather see it burn than let you profit from it. The painting wavered in his hands. For a terrible moment, I thought he might actually do it. Then Marjorie burst into tears, and everything fell apart. As the officers led Nolan away, Marjorie collapsed into my grandmother's antique chair, her carefully maintained facade crumbling completely. We're going to lose everything, she whispered, more to herself than to me. You already have, I said, but something in her voice made me pause. This wasn't the same imperious woman who'd swept into my life demanding answers about my finances. You don't understand, she said, pulling a crumpled letter from her designer purse. The bank. They're not just taking my house. They're taking his future too. I took the letter, scanning its contents while Liana and Ethan watched silently. Foreclosure notices, medical bills, and beneath it all, a devastating diagnosis. Terminal cancer. Marjorie's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, showing me photos of prescription bottles and treatment centers. I wanted to leave him something, she said. All his life, I promised him he'd be taken care of. The painting. It seemed like an answer to prayer. So you manipulated him into targeting me? My voice cracked. No. She met my eyes for the first time. He found you on his own. The painting, the art history, the charm, that was all him. I just encouraged it when I realized what it could mean for us. The truth hit me like a physical blow. He never loved me at all, did he? He wanted to, Marjorie said softly. I think that's why he got so desperate at the end. The guilt was eating him alive. Liana stepped forward, her phone still recording. This doesn't excuse what they did. No, I agreed. It doesn't. I looked at the painting, now safely back on my wall. The tiny red cardinal seemed to watch us, a silent witness to everything that had happened. But it explains it. I turned to Ethan. What are their chances? With the evidence? They're looking at serious time. He hesitated. Unless the primary victim decides not to press charges, Liana finished, her eyes widening. Alara, you can't be serious. But I was already pulling up my banking app. The painting stays with me, I said to Marjorie. But I'm going to pay for your treatment. Why? She whispered. Because revenge doesn't heal anything. And maybe? I looked at the family photos on my wall, generations of Finches watching over us. Maybe breaking cycles is more important than breaking people. Marjorie reached for my hand, but I stepped back. This isn't forgiveness, I said firmly. This is me choosing not to let your mistakes poison my future too. Through the window, I watched the police car carrying Nolan disappear around the corner. Sometimes the hardest part of revenge isn't taking it, it's choosing to let it go. 6 months later, I stood in front of my YouTube camera, filming a different kind of video than my usual cybersecurity tutorials. Today, I want to talk about digital footprints I began and how the traces we leave online can tell stories we never meant to share. The painting hung behind me, its presence a silent reminder of everything that had changed. My subscriber count had doubled after the story broke. Apparently, people love true crime stories involving art theft and family betrayal. After the video, I checked my email. There was one from Marjorie's oncologist, confirming her latest treatment had gone well. Another from Ethan, updating me on Nolan's community service arrangement, the deal we'd worked out instead of prison time. He was teaching art history to at-risk youth now, using his knowledge for something positive for once. My doorbell rang. Liana stood there with takeout and a determined look. "You're not spending another Friday night alone with your computers." "I'm not alone," I said, letting her in. "I have 3 million subscribers now." "Funny." She set the food down, then noticed the small red cardinal I'd painted on my office wall. "New decoration?" "Something like that." I hadn't told anyone about the letter Nolan had sent last week, explaining how he'd first discovered my grandmother's painting in an old auction catalog. How finding it had started as a con but turned into an obsession, then guilt, then something he couldn't control. "You know what's ironic?" I said, opening the takeout containers. All that drama over the painting's monetary value, and in the end, its real worth had nothing to do with money. "Oh!" Liana raised an eyebrow. It taught me something about myself. About choosing who to trust, but also about choosing who to forgive. I glanced at my phone, where Marjorie's text about her improving health waited for a response. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones fighting their own battles. "Just promise me one thing," Liana said, handing me chopsticks. "The next time a mysterious stranger emails you about family heirlooms, I'll run a full background check first." I finished laughing. Later that night, after Liana left, I stood in front of the painting. The storm clouds in the corner seemed lighter somehow, or maybe I just saw them differently now. My grandmother used to say that every painting tells 2 stories, the one on the canvas and the one in the viewer's heart. I touched the frame gently, thinking about how some things become more valuable after they've been nearly lost. Then I opened my laptop and began typing, "Dear Marjorie, about your next treatment session. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better."